All right, that's all good. So if without further ado, we're gonna let Dr. Enyia go ahead and introduce himself, give you guys a little background information, and then start with his presentation. Go ahead,
Thank you
doctor.
thank you so much, Elliot and brothers. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to talk about the differences between book smarts and street smarts. I really appreciate the fact that you led with asking us how we currently conceptualize um, street smarts and book smarts, because what I found is that the narrative, kind of depending on your context and how you grew up and lived experience, those terms can mean can mean different things. And so my hope out of this conversation is to make this a conversation and to really glean from you all um, how you all are moving as both book smart and street smart. And I noted in the chat a few days ago that for me it's about both and. And so let me just pull up my slide deck, and I just have a few slides just to kind of level set the conversation um, and go from there. So let me do that now. If you could let me know if you can see my slides.
Yes, sir. We can.
Okay, great. So I'm all things AI or Gen AI, right? So I use Gamma to just kind of to train the model to come up with this content here. So I'm going to try to give my own personal examples, but I also want to try to lead with a more formal definition of both, and then kind of walk through some other elements of what it means for us as conscious Black men. And so, as was noted earlier, um, I conceptualize this as different types of intelligence, and they are not mutually exclusive. We can be both and. And so that's like one key takeaway. That phrase, both and, I want to kind of hammer that home in the course of this conversation. And so, in terms of, so for context, my background is in medicine, public health, and health policy. So naturally, I've had to matriculate through the school system in order to attain my degrees. And so that is a simple example of book smarts. And then as well, you're able to ideally acquire critical thinking skills and learn how to process information in ways that are helpful. And so, you can also frame it as theory versus practice. Now, I'll pause here to say that, one of the reasons why, so my doctorate was in health policy, and my dissertation was an applied dissertation, meaning that for me, like, while the theory is important and is necessary, I'm all about how does this research make sense? How can I make this make sense for like just people in general? And so I've had to learn how to toggle between kind of knowing when to put on or take off my academic hat and put on my okay, the brother that grew up on the side of Chicago hat. Um, and so with the street smarts piece, it's how do you adapt? What are those practical skills um, that you acquire out of necessity or out of just being in certain environments where you're able to pick up on certain skills that will help you to move around and be adaptable. And so again, for us as Black men, you know, um, I would argue that by necessity, I'll say that for Black men, um, uh, we are naturally able to adapt. I would argue, compared to other of our counterparts. Part of it, I think, it is also because of how we grew up, but two, I think just at a very, kind of fundamental level of our nature, like who we are, and the brilliance that we bring to any space and context, like that makes us great and brilliant. But the systems that are in place weren't built with us in mind, and so we have to, and so there are times where we have to navigate spaces uh, in this kind of W.E.B. Du Bois context in terms of a consciousness to be able to move and to engage and to socialize with people who at times wonder how you got into this room, how'd you get that job, right? So it's all those it, it is all of those nuances that impact how you're able to be both and. Now, I give talks all the time. I think that it is critically important to really know your audience and know how to prepare for the circles that you travel in. And so there's a thing around, okay, how do you maintain your identity in the context of a society or a setting that is diametrically opposed to your brilliance? Um, I'll give an example. So in my doctoral program, there is a part of the curriculum where we have to pass our comprehensive exams. Um, my my dissertation chair was an older white man who was actually a mentor of mine. And what happened was I failed the comp exam twice over the course of like 2 or 3 months. And the department policy was that if the student fails the comp exams, then those are grounds for dismissal. And so of course, I was despondent. I was like, I like this, no, like I'm not going out like that. So when I met with my chair to go over the exam, like he literally told me that I was too smart for their test. And that was boggling to me. Like, I'm like, I don't know what that means. What do you mean? And so, but a part of what that said to me was that the master's tools are inferior. These tests, these assessments that I argue are culturally biased, and are not reflective of measuring different types of intelligence, are serving as barriers to success for those who weren't at the table in terms of structuring those tools and systems. So back to knowing your audience. Um, it is critically important to really get clear about how, and get feedback about how you want to connect with people from different audiences. There are 4 different types of comprehension styles. Um, one is a kind of like a story approach or a narrative approach. One is taking a step-by-step approach to delivering content to your audience. Others are kind of like a mix of how do you convey this information based upon the audience that is present, because we all learn differently. And so part of talking between book smarts and street smarts is knowing how to deliver your messages in ways that resonate with the audiences as much as possible. And so part of what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to use some pithy statements as well as some stories or examples to help kind of bring context and color to what I'm sharing. And absolutely critical in terms of reading the room. So I work in policy and politics, and this of course spans to other industries as well and circles. But having the ability or the awareness to read the room and to really understand cues and how to adapt to facial expressions and body language and tone, and of course being mindful of how you're showing up, right? And for me, that self-awareness came from therapy. I've been seeing a Black psychologist for the past 6 years, and I have a coach or coaches, and so it's about uh, building up your emotional intelligence and your relational intelligence and, and your leadership intelligence, um, to a place where you're able to navigate different rooms astutely. And then after active listening, um, um, being being engaged and intentional about finding common ground with people. Um, um, how do you build stronger relationships? Well, it comes with, I think, being clear about what your triggers are, how you show up, um, um, how to navigate office politics as well. Most of so the past maybe 2 or 3 jobs that I've had have come from people that know me, not so much my book information or my degrees, as much as the fact that I was intentional about active listening, having coffees, dinners, meetings, those kind of conversations to build relationships so that as opportunities arose, I will be top of mind. And I kind of touched on the office politics piece. Like, here are some basic do's and don'ts, right? So focus on focus on building positive relationships. Don't engage in gossip, etc. Maintain a professional demeanor. Don't shit where you eat. I believe that most of you all kind of know what I'm going um, with that, but I'll say that be very mindful of, especially in this age of Me Too, like it's very helpful to to keep your nose clean. Like, keep your personal relationships, like, try and make every effort not to cross that line, especially at work. I know, I have been in settings where, um, I've been um, I've been flirted with, and fortunately, I had enough, background and experience to pick up on what was happening, and I was prepared um, to address those things if it got to the point where I really got uncomfortable, because it can be gray. And so, I had lived long enough to be able to ensure that if this behavior is going on, that I knew what the policies were, and I was able to, okay, be prepared to make some decisions about how I was going to move to ensure that I was going to preserve my career. Um, and of course, mentors and allies, that's helpful. Being intentional about building those relationships with your colleagues, to facilitate um, projects and outcomes, that's important. Um, and then, in terms of social etiquette for Black men in corporate settings, I think we all have a good sense of this framework here. Like, um, it is if you're going to work in a corporate setting, yes, it is important to maintain who and whose you are and be your authentic self. Um, at the same time, that is a process to get to that place where you have become clear about how you want to show up in terms of your attire, and things of that nature, your brand, right? And so you are choosing to work in corporate, and so there are ways in which you want to distinguish yourself without losing your sense of identity. Real big on self advocacy. I've had to learn that skill. Like even now, I am working on my assertiveness and my agency and my confidence in different ways. I'm real big on helping people feel seen and heard and valued. I typically have been, one of a few black men in a room. So I've had to learn how to advocate for myself in ways that achieve the outcomes that I wanted to achieve, and that's a process. I'm real big on mentors and networking. It's all about the social capital. Like it, it's it is critically important to build out the social political capital um, to ensure that you have a plethora of options to consider as you navigate, whether that's on the job, or if you are on the job, seen in earnest. And then of course, you can't be your best self by yourself, right? You can't be your best self by yourself. And so it's important to get to a place where you feel comfortable collaborating, and working as a team. So that's what I had in terms of my formal slide deck. I'm going to open up the floor um, for for your thoughts and the conversation. You see, my son just joined us, so I look forward to hearing your examples, your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. Also, actually, because I was just listening to a podcast today, and so in corporate America, well, I mean, as we all know, when a group of black males are seen together, it's seen as a threat to the outside world. So, how do we go about overcoming that issue when when we do, or we are needed to network with each other and get a team of you know black men together when there's already this stereotype that we're facing, that if there is 3 or 4 black men together, they're not doing anything, they're messing around, or it's this stereotype that's already predisposed upon us. So one, how do we be comfortable with addressing another a person of color to get them within our networking circle? And then how do we I should say, how do we pretty much force corporate America to understand that just because there's a group of black men together doesn't necessarily mean, one, we're a threat, and two, there is some kind of common goal that we're trying to achieve in that aspect.
Yeah, that's a big question. I think part of it is one, galvanizing a strong community around you, of individuals that can bring you clarity about um, where you're trying to go. Because what I found is that we are all becoming someone. It's a process, and a lot of it, at least based upon my experience, is that as I am doing the inner work on myself to get clear about like who and whose I am, and my triggers, and like and what areas of my life need to be optimized. It's in that process where I'm able to enter spaces as a new version of me, with a stronger voice, and with the agency to be able to reach out to individuals who in a previous season I probably would not have reached out to. And so I think, part of it is, really knowing who who and whose you are, and being able to lean into your community to be able to support how you want to grow. Because unless and until you're at a place where you are comfortable and confident on working on you first, you can enter, different sectors of society, and if you find that you are kind of bumping into the same type of person who might trigger you, or you are um, encountering some issue that seems to just kind of follow you, that's a sign, perhaps, for you to reflect and explore how you want to navigate that space, so that you can show up in other spaces as a better version of you. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's just that's just based on my own experience.
No, thank you. And the second question I have, because I was in the military, so a lot of the times in senior leadership, you have people that come from all different walks of life. So one of the barriers that I faced a lot of time was just getting um, people to care more about themselves. And so how would you necessarily go about when you do have the knuckleheads that do come in and they're not necessarily fully aware that there is a certain kind of way that you must act and carry yourself and things like that when you're in corporate America, and for that matter, when I was in the military, there was a certain kind of, there's certain operating way to operate that you had to, even down to the uniform and making sure your uniform is squared away, showing up on time, things that we have to do. It was really, pulling teeth with a lot of these young Black males that were coming, into my division, I should say. There's a speed trap. So for me, it was hard to just really get them to dial in. So how do I do that? How do you do that?
I think part of it it is the intentionality about meeting them where they are, and it can be as simple as just kind of, small talk. So whether if it's, men, or males, it can be sports, or weather, or something that's trending that could serve as a conversation piece that will facilitate a more meaningful conversation. And so it does take a little bit of getting out of your comfort zone, and and assessing, again, kind of reading the room and doing some active listening to determine, okay, what are some specific areas that this person has talked about, or what parts of their background might you want to research further and ask questions about. So it's really taking an inquisitive approach to building relationships with those men, or males, to be able to kind of build from there.
Thank you, Doctor.
Mhm.
Mr. Felder, did you have any questions for Doctor before I ask any more questions?
I didn't. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
You guys can hear me. Hey, Dr. O, man, always I love the insight. I always love your perspective, man. I don't really have any questions, man. Like I said, I left with something, so that was the intent.
Awesome. So I would love to hear what you left with, so I can, yeah.
I think one of the biggest things was just the way I always find it fascinating how as African Americans we navigate the doctoral pursuit. I heard it can be extremely political. It can be discouraging. It can sometimes be a lot of bias, stereotypes. So I think that's one of the biggest things I picked up on just you know, how sometimes it can insult your intelligence. And you know,
Yeah.
something simple as a cliche of "you too smart for your own good," how that can be such a so weaponized against us.
Mhm.
And it translates in so many different areas.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, I'll say that, you know, my chair, he meant well, and I don't think that he meant it in kind of like a condescending way. But it really spoke volumes about the system that's in place and the fact that I brought so much into the assessment that it didn't necessarily fit within the context of what they were looking for that was
Yeah,
being
absolutely.
a pass, right? And so, yeah,
Yeah.
Well, it's actually interesting. Even with my son, it, it's drawing to me when they are so surprised by technology. And me and my wife has had conversations. And oh, he can read. He's really good with math. And so when we have conference, they're so surprised. Like, no, he's really legit. And we're just looking, and we're like, yeah, he is, but they can't expound on it. It's just it's such a I think it's such a culture shock to this presence of that is a person of color that's articulate themselves so well, are able to do so easily, and it so when you say that your professor, he said that the test really thought about my son because there's so many times when this is not the first time, but teacher has expressed to them that he's really hard, and it's for me it's like, oh, my kids are but even personally I have um I guess feedback when I was in school. I graduated with valedictorian, things like that, and so it's just I staggering that you know because it's so alarming because they look around, but many people of color that was accolade, things like that. But it comes like I think like you were saying, from I guess for me, it was more of the need to get out for me. So I realized that my wasn't so good, so I moved down to the education side. And so and I don't know for yourself how you decided that you wanted to become a doctor. So for me that was my avenue, and how I decided, like, hey, I didn't, I can do sports, I can do other stuff, but I realized that my education was going to get me out of my circumstances. And that's what really, drove me to persevere and to become, hit these accolades of valedictorian or straight A's and things like that of that aspect. So, for yourself though, when did you realize that you had to make that shift and how you were attacking life? I should from the South Chicago to making that decision of saying, like, you know what, I'm gonna go and be a doctor.
yeah. So for me, because I grew up in an environment in a household where most, like my parents and my uncles and aunts, they all had higher education degrees. It was like it wasn't like there was no excuse, for us. I'm the oldest of six kids to at least get a bachelor's degree. And so I grew, and because I grew up in an environment, it was expected that I would achieve some higher education degree, beyond the bachelor's at least. And so, but as I lived life after college, and I got into the workforce, and was trying to find my way, um, I had to navigate those challenges of working in corporate America as a Black male, and trying to figure out all of the unspoken rules, and trying to avoid landmines and trying to find the language that articulated what I was experiencing. So I always knew that I was going to get um, some terminal degree. I didn't. So while I wanted to become a medical doctor, um, my my vision was a lot bigger than just seeing patients as a physician. It also evolved into public health and now health policy. And um, so yeah, just that's just been my journey of trying to figure out my unique niche and voice in the medical public health policy space.
Thank you. So I do have another question, because you're holding your son right now. So how do we, and I have kids as well. So how do we are trying to provide better for our families, and not so much as they have to struggle as much as we did, as where maybe food was coming from or things like that, and in many other ways. We're trying to, you know, make sure they have a better education. We're trying to provide for them in ways that many of our parents weren't able to provide for us. So but even as we're doing this for them, I still find, if that my son is in a better school, well, he's the only Black person, he's maybe one or two,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's still things that he has to navigate now, as well in these rooms, that it might not be as a survival mode, but it's something different as like, so, um he, there's a boy that say, he's like, your hair is, and, you know, you know give him the street answer and say, oh, well, go fuck, go fuck himself or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I had to really dial it back and really understand, okay, he's different in a different era than where I might have grown up. And so I had to explain to him and tell him, your hair is different than everybody else's, and it's not necessarily mean your hair is messy, but it's okay for your hair to be in this state, because this is how our people, wear their hair, or this is how our people, might look when we haven't had a haircut in a few days or something like that. And so he's having, our kids are going to have to navigate some of these same differences of being the only African American or person of color in rooms, but their obstacles and some of the things that they're facing are going to be completely different.
Yeah.
So, what is, some of the ways that, we are able to kind of relate back to our kids in that way, to make them understand that it's okay to be different, but there's a way to go about being different, and there's a way about going about, addressing somebody that might not know when they say, well, your hair looks messy, or it doesn't look like normal, in that aspect, to where like don't want anymore, like in that case.
Yeah, so from birth, I've been very intentional with speaking and reading daily positive affirmations to my son. And we have a budding library of books that I used to read to him and to get into the habit of affirming him, and also using the resources that are age appropriate to help to broach topics about bullying or racism, um, culture, right? And so it's to your point about, it's important for us as the parents to be consistent about the messaging that we want uh, our kids to hear and receive, because when they are outside of our homes, yes, it's an entire world that is sending a lot of the opposite messages, and with social media and TV movies. And so we can do what we can to hold space for our kids to process their thoughts and emotions. That is critically important. That's what I plan to do with my son, to really get into the habit of having him feel heard and seen and valued. And it's really reinforcing, you know, a lot of what is brilliant about us as Black people, to plant those seeds, so that when he is out on his own and he is at school, that there is, like, we've laid the groundwork for him to build upon, um, as they grow. So
Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate it. So I see Robert, you joined the group. Did you have any questions for Doctor before we go ahead?
So I just came in like really like in the middle of a conversation, but something you did just say, I just want to like give a different spin. So like one of the things you said you were gonna talk to your son about as he gets older is like age appropriate stuff. And like bullying is what I honed in on, because I know when I was a kid, I felt like the adults that were around me were kind of like reinforcing the attitudes of the kids that I was going to school with, as opposed to like saying like, no, what they're doing is wrong. It was like, okay, well, you got to go hard back on them if they're going hard on you. And like the impression that I'm getting from you is that as your son gets older, that's not how you're going to approach it. You're not going to say like, what you're not going to like be on the side of if someone's bullying your son, essentially.
no, sir. I am. So I will be that parent, and my wife and I, will be those parents who will be, um, in the faces of the teachers, and we will be showing up, tag teaming consistently, and they will know that my child, like, won't be talked to or treated any type of way. Um, and and so that is one way in which I'm going to ensure that I'm doing all that I can to be a protector and an advocate for my son's well-being. And so, yeah, I think so there's space to process, what might be happening with your child. Absolutely. Um, but I think it takes a a multi-level approach to cover all the bases in a way where the outcomes are better. And so, for me, it's about knowing the policies that are in place to address bullying, for example, um, being present and engaged as parents, um, being in constant communication with the teachers and instructors and the staff is going to be important. Um, and so, yeah, it's because I want to make sure that at the end of the day, that because you can't shield your kids from everything, right? So, but it is important to do all that that you can do, and to know the policies and procedures that are in place to ensure that if and when things happen, like, okay, well, this couple or family, you know, they're gonna be like, they move differently. So
Yeah, I can actually piggyback on that because this last year with my son, he had such an issue with this other kid, fair-skinned kid. And in the beginning, it was it in the beginning they tried to frame it as if my son was the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would say, Braylon today he did this. Braylon today he did this. So when we started addressing the issue with Braylon and having a conversation with him off and away from school. But after a while, we just started to say, like, when the teacher has a problem or issue, we're the ones showing up. When when we're going to go pick up the kid, when I go and pick up my son from school, I'm going straight to the teacher and I'm advocating. I'm saying, how was Braylon's day today? In front of the teacher, I'm addressing the what he did wrong, but I'm also ensuring to the teacher, like, just so you know, we are on the same page of behavior. But if it's anything other than maybe some bullying or things like that, then you need to address that. And it got to the fact to even to the point to where we had to vouch for the teacher to tell her, you need help, because she would come to and say, oh, this happened and this while I was teaching. And Braylon is telling us another story. And so at some point I'm going to believe my son. At some point if he's constantly saying so, it got to the point to where it did get down to the fact that the other kid was he just had what I say, what do they have in Hotel Transylvania? He zinged to my son, to where everywhere my son was at, whatever my son was doing, he wanted to be around, but to the point to where he was causing trouble. So there was an instance to where that it was a spitting issue. And they were on the playground, and Braylon, we started to say, hey, Braylon, when this kid comes around, you walk away, you leave, you distance yourself from the situation, because this kid obviously is not getting talked to at home to improve his behavior, and it's still happening at school. So Braylon was starting to get it after a while, but there would be times when they all have the same friends, or they're around each other, whatever. And it got to the point where the kids was like, no, Grayson is the one that did this. No, he's the one that did it. And, they started to vouch, because they started to understand that, it's not just Braylon. It's not Braylon doing this. And we're going to start speaking up in this aspect, because, that was, obviously the spitting thing was completely wrong. And so, even when we were talking with the principal and things like that, we had to bring to her attention that, it takes two to tango. So as much as you want to make it seem like my son is the issue, because it seemed like the color of his skin, and the other kid is a different race, we have to look at the actions of the other kid. And the teacher, the teacher ended up getting help at the end of the year, having another teacher be around. We had to separate, obviously, the kids, but there was things that went into place to where now my son wasn't the issue, and you see this the other kid that's the problem. It's the other kid that's causing the issues, and now it's a little bit more easier to believe my son when he does something or when he says something. So it's definitely, like you say, it's the advocacy for your kid in these situations to understand, hey, there might be, like kids do, they have issues with being in other people's spaces, or the me complex and things like that, which is understandable, because my son is only in first grade. So you understand these aspects, but there's a certain part where there is a little bit of bullying that's happening, that the teachers need to understand that just because he's this color doesn't mean he's the one causing the problem. And I think they understood that, because of the consistency that we were as parents, as kept constantly understanding and correcting and understanding, like, we're going to work with you if that is the case in issues, but if it's not the case in issues, you need to also step up to the plate and be an advocate for him also.
Yeah.
I'll just say one more thing. So I know this isn't like the forum for this specific issue, but like when I first hopped on, Elliot, I heard you mentioning how like when you want to put your kid in a good school, it's usually like one where the kid's only black one, and so like that's something I've thought about a lot, is like how can black people like establish like schools that are high academic, that are for black children. Like I know of some like specific examples, but like nothing that seems to like can be scaled across the country, especially like when you have public school districts that are already predominantly black anyway. And so that like the issues that Elliot you just talked about with your son, like it wouldn't be an issue that specifically has to do with racism, so we could at least like shield our kids from that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think that comes with funding. I think that comes with capitalism, and because even out here, it's just sad because we have a charter school that's for Black kids, but they have to go on a lottery list. So it's a lottery list. So you put their name on the list, and then they have to wait. And like you say, it's a dime a dozen of finding these schools, or if there is predominantly Black schools, it's not in a good neighborhood. And that is the reason why it's predominantly Black school. And a lot of the times when you're in those schoolings, though, it's if they had a little bit more funding, they will be excelling over these other schools that are predominantly white. But they do that. It's like it's an intentional purpose of not giving you the funding, not giving you the right books, not giving you the teachers that want to be teachers, things like that, because they want to keep you in this bracket of, oh yeah, they're just in that neighborhood, then they're gonna do bad. So I think that comes with our generation of understanding that and wanting to change that and put more capitalism money back into the schooling for our kids, because in this case, in instances where they we know that Black children excel well when they're amongst other Black kids, and it's just a matter of believing that for ourselves and then putting our money where our mouth is.
Yeah, you're speaking to a much broader issue there in terms of white supremacy and the various ways in which it manifests, which is a whole nother conversation. It's a whole deeper, conversation. But yes, I'm a big advocate of Afrocentric curricula, and all things Black. And yes, the capitalism piece is part and parcel of the way things are structured. And you have the policies that are in place that are racist, and so yeah, it's that's a much broader challenge. um it's not it's not that it's not doable to foster those types of institutions and to support them, but it's just it would it just it's it, it's a heavier lift, and it requires much more than perhaps most of us have the capacity to be able to support in a meaningful, sustainable way.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, doctor, I really appreciate you taking the time to, enlighten us and give us some good points and tips. And if you don't have any other questions, Robert, we're gonna go ahead and sign it off and get the rest of the week started.
I'm all good.
All right, doctor, I appreciate you. Thank you again. And did your son go to sleep?
Yes, he did.
Well, see, nap time. So now you get a
Right.
little break.
Right.
Enjoy
Thank
that.
you.
Enjoy that.
Thank you.
But
Yeah.
I appreciate you, doctor, and thank you again. And I hope you guys the rest of your week go well.
You too. Thank you.
All right. Bye.